Hola chicos, soy señorita Schaefer y hoy vamos a hablar de la gramática de capítulo 2a en español 2 y vamos a hablar de reflexive verbs. Reflexive verbs are something that we don't really have in English, but we're going to learn what those mean. Y si quieres leerlo en sus libros de texto, puedes ir a página 80. The big question for today kind of has two parts. First of all, what is a reflexive verb? And secondly, when do we use them? So please go ahead and write these two questions at the top of your paper, and hopefully they can help guide you throughout this lesson so you know what you should be thinking about. You can kind of direct your brain. And after you get that down, we'll move on to the next page. Alrighty, so first we'll talk about what is a reflexive verb. We use reflexive verbs to say that people do something to or for themselves, and that's the key. We don't really have this in English, but in Spanish they would say, I shower myself. Now in English that myself isn't necessary, but in Spanish it is. So examples of times that we would use reflexive verbs are washing one's hands or brushing one's hair, because the person is doing the action and receiving the action. So I kind of like to draw myself a little visual. For those of you who are visual learners, I think that this helps a little bit. I just like to put a little man, and he's both doing the action and receiving the action. So if that helps you at all, but please go ahead and write down this first point in your notes, and then we'll do this example together. Antes de una cita, yo me ducho y me arreglo el pelo. So before going on a date, I, and then here are our reflexive verbs. Me ducho y me arreglo. So what we're saying is I shower myself and I fix my hair. You know that a verb is reflexive if its infinitive form ends with the letter se. Go ahead and write that down in your notes, please, too. We're going to talk about how to conjugate them. You'll notice that in these ones in our first example, we have this extra word out here. And then in this example, you can see it at the end of the verb. So we'll talk about why that is. Alrighty. So the reflexive pronouns in Spanish are me, te, se, nos, and os. Each pronoun corresponds to a different subject. And I bet that you could guess these based on what you've learned of indirect object pronouns. But we'll go ahead and write them into our chart, and then we'll conjugate the verb. We're going to work with the verb secarse, which means to to dry oneself. So here's the se, and it's going to actually change and go up front. So there's a couple songs on Moodle that kind of give catchy ways to remember this. But whenever you conjugate an infinitive, remember an infinitive is something that has this se on the end of it. You're going to need to take that se, make it the right thing, and put it out front. This is kind of like when we use it, indirect object pronoun, we're doing something to someone else, but this time we're doing it to ourselves. Then we're going to take up our AR and find our stem. So our stem is sec. And then we'll just add our endings like usual. There's no difference there. So the only difference is that before you conjugate, you need to take this ending off, put it in the front, and then turn it into the appropriate thing. It will always match. So the yo will always go with me, the tu will always go with te. So we have me seco, te secas, se seca, nos secamos, os secáis, and se secan. Once again, let's look at these steps really fast. Step 1. Take this se on the end, move it out front, and make it the appropriate thing for whoever you're talking about. So this would be I shower myself, you shower yourself, he showers himself. I dry myself, you dry yourself, etc. Then we're going to find our stem like we always do. In this case it's sec. And then we'll add our endings. So the O will always be the ending when the me is out front. The as will always be the ending when the te is out front. If you wanted to add your subject, you would say yo me seco, tú te secas, so it comes right before the verb. After you have this conjugation down on your sheet, you can go ahead and move on to the next page with us. We're just going to talk about a couple of the details with reflexive verbs. Detail number 1. Some verbs have both reflexive and non-reflexive forms and usages. A verb is used in its non-reflective verb if the action is being done to someone or something else. So for example, we would say, lavo el coche a menudo. I wash the car sometimes. And you can ask yourself, what or who am I washing? We're washing the car. Is this something that I do to myself? No. The little man is doing the action, but he's doing it to the car, so it's not a reflexive verb. We don't have the reflexive pronoun. However, down here, we have me lavo el pelo todos los días. What are you washing? Hair. You're washing your own hair, so we need the me out front to show that the little man is both doing the action and receiving the action. Detail number 2. When you use a reflexive verb with parts of the body or articles of clothing, use the definite article. Now remember that the definite article is el, la, los, or las. And this is because we're already saying, using the reflexive pronoun, the me, te, se, nos, os, we're already showing that it's to ourselves. So we wouldn't need to say like, I paint my nails to myself, right? So our example here, siempre te pintas las uñas. Do you always paint your nails? But we're going to use las uñas because we have this te here showing that it's like your. Here's another example. Felipe se pone los zapatos. Felipe puts the shoes on himself. So we don't need to say he puts his shoes on himself just because it's a little bit repetitive that way. We're already saying he's doing it to himself. So we use the the definite article. This is just kind of something that you have to memorize, but I'll keep on reminding you as we learn. Alrighty, our last detail that we're going to work on before we finish up this lesson is how we place the reflexive pronouns. So you can place it in a few different places depending what's going on. You can put a reflexive pronoun before the conjugated verb. Now this is always an option every single time it will work. The other option is that you can attach them to the infinitive, and you can only do that when you have an infinitive to attach them to. So remember, your reflexive pronouns are me, te, se, os, and nos. And depending on whether you have an infinitive or not, you can put them accordingly. So for example, we have voy a duchar. I am going to shower. You have both an infinitive and a conjugated verb, so you can choose to put me in two different places. We can either put it here at the front before the conjugated verb, me voy a duchar, or we can attach it here to the infinitive, voy a ducharme. Notice that when you attach it to the infinitive, it's actually attached. There are no spaces. We'll do one more example. Here we have, te tienes que vestir para la fiesta. You have to dress yourself for the party. Once again, we have both a conjugated verb and an infinitive. This means that we can choose to put the te, the reflexive pronoun, either right here before the conjugated verb, or we can attach it to the infinitive right here. Tienes que vestirte para la fiesta. There's not one that's better than the other. It's not that one is more correct than the other. A native speaker would do it both ways. You just have to remember that you can only attach it if you have an infinitive. You cannot attach it to a conjugated verb. If I were you, I would add that to these notes. Cannot attach to the end of a conjugated verb. And the danger in this is that sometimes people start to do that. Alrighty, so we kind of covered a lot of information today. I tried to break it up onto different slides so that you can go back and listen if you're confused. We did one on what is a reflexive verb. So a reflexive verb is an action that someone does to or for himself. If you want to draw the little man, if that visual helps you, that he both does the action and receives the action. The second slide is we talked about how to conjugate. So to conjugate a reflexive verb, you take the say, change it to whatever it needs to be, me, te, nos, os, and put it in front. They'll be directly before the verb. So let's do ducharse while we chat. Ducharse, and we'll conjugate for yo. I shower myself. So we'll take the say and we'll move it up front, but because we're conjugating for yo, it has to be me. Okay? Then we'll find the stem and add the ending, the appropriate ending, just like we've always said. So the stem of ducharse, I cut off the AR. I have duch. And then we'll add the ending for yo. Oh. So me ducho. The third slide talked about how sometimes verbs are reflexive and sometimes the same verb is not. So that kind of goes back up here to this little man, where if we wash the car, that's not reflexive. If we wash our hands, it is. If we feed the dog, or let's not do that one. If we dress our little brother, that's not reflexive. If we dress ourselves, that is. The fourth slide talked about how we use definite articles when we're using reflexive verbs with either body parts or clothing, because we're already specifying that we're doing it to or for ourselves. And then the last thing we talked about, let's see, I'll put it up here in red so it's easier to see. The last thing that we talked about is how you can attach reflexive pronouns, that's the me, te, etc., to the end of an infinitive. This can be a weird concept, you guys, because it's something that we don't have in English, but I have no doubt that you will grasp it and that you'll get it down. If you want a couple more videos from different people, there are a few more on Moodle from Senor Woolley and some others. We're all, from Senor Jordan, and we'll watch the Senor Woolley song as well. Gracias por escuchar. As always, if you have any questions at all, please go ahead and write them down so that you can remember to ask in class. Y adios.